Snow fell like dust shaken from heaven, slow, patient and endless. The train whistle had faded into the white distance, leaving only the sound of wind moving between the brittle boards of the old station. Clara May Hollis stood on the frozen platform, her breath trembling in small clouds before vanishing. Her gloved hands were empty now. The letter she'd carried from Kansas City had slipped into the snow, its ink running, its promise broken. The man who wrote it, the one who swore to marry her once she arrived, had never come. The silence pressed close. A few townsfolk lingered near the depot door, pretending not to stare. They whispered through their scarves, eyes sliding over her like cold blades. A woman without a man in a place like this was nothing but a question people asked each other when the day was dull. Clara tried to straighten her shoulders. The thin brown coat she wore was made for autumn, not this merciless winter. Beneath it, her pale blue dress clung to her legs, the fabric stiff from frost. She'd sewn it herself, each stitch a small prayer for a new beginning. Now, as wind gnawed at her collar, it felt like a foolish flag raised over surrender. The stationmaster, Mr. Langford, coughed into his mitten and stepped forward. "Ma'am, I reckon the next train won't be till Monday," he said, eyes darting away from hers. "Best find yourself a room at Mrs. Vance's." "I don't have money for a room," Clara replied quietly. Her voice cracked, thin as the ice beneath her boots. Langford frowned, tugging at his collar. "Then, best wait inside. Not good to be out here alone." But he didn't open the door for her. He simply walked back into the warm interior, leaving her in the snow as if kindness might tarnish his reputation. Clara bent to pick up her letter, but the wind caught it, tumbling it toward the tracks. It vanished beneath a wave of white. She sank to her knees, breath hitching. Around her, the world was wide and merciless, sky and land and snow all the same color. Her heart ached for something human, something warm, something that did not end in departure. The sound came first, a low rhythm of hooves against ice. Then, through the veil of snow, a figure emerged. He was tall, bare to the waist despite the storm, his bronze skin gleaming under a dusting of frost. A fur-lined hide hung over one shoulder, snow caught in the strands of his black braided hair. The townsfolk shifted uneasily. Clara rose, wiping her face with her sleeve, her pulse hammering. The man moved with quiet certainty, like the storm itself parted for him. He stopped at the edge of the platform. His eyes, dark, steady, unhurried, met hers. "You'll freeze," he said simply. His English was careful, shaped by thought rather than habit. "I'm fine," she answered, though her teeth chattered on the words. He tilted his head. "Fine people do not shake like that." From his shoulder, he drew a heavy fur cloak and held it out to her. The watching townsfolk muttered. Someone spat into the snow. "Go on, girl, you best not," an older man hissed from the doorway. "Ain't right." Shame burned her cheeks hotter than the cold. But the wind cut deeper, and the cloak's warmth seemed to breathe in her direction. The man waited. No demand, no impatience, just quiet presence. When she didn't take it, he stepped closer, wrapping it around her shoulders himself. His hands were large, scarred, steady. The smell of wood smoke and pine clung to the fur. For a heartbeat, the world softened. She felt small, sheltered, absurdly safe. She looked up at him. "Why would you?" "Because I can," he said. His voice was low, almost gentle. "And because no one else does." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak gratitude, but found no words that wouldn't break her voice. He studied her face for a moment longer, then glanced toward the tracks, where snow was already burying the rails. "You wait for someone?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "But he's not coming." He nodded, as if that confirmed something he already knew. "Then come with me. You will die here." The murmur from the depot grew louder. "Don't you dare go with him," Mrs. Vance cried, her red scarf whipping in the wind. "He's one of them savages." Clara flinched. The man's expression didn't change. If the insult wounded him, it hid deep. He turned toward the snowbound road beyond the tracks. "My name is Tayan Greyhawk," he said without looking back. "I have food, fire, shelter. You can stay till the storm ends. She hesitated. The cold gnawed at her ankles, pain creeping upward like frost through bone. The memory of her last night in Kansas surfaced. The landlord pounding on her door, the empty cupboard, the train ticket bought with her mother's wedding ring. Every road behind her had closed. This one opened, strange and silent, before her. "I don't know you," she said softly. He looked at her then, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across his mouth. "You will." He turned to leave. Snow gathered in his hair like ash. She watched him walk into the whiteness, the strength in his stride carrying both defiance and peace. Her body screamed to move, but her pride chained her in place. The sky dimmed to gray. Her fingers stiffened. She thought of her mother's voice long ago. A woman's worth isn't in who keeps her warm, but in whether she can still love when the world goes cold. Love, no. But survival, perhaps. Clara took a single step off the platform. The fur cloak shifted on her shoulders. Ahead, Tayan paused as if he'd known she'd follow. When she reached him, the wind stilled for a moment. They walked without speaking. The town fell away behind them, its judgment fading beneath snow. The road narrowed into the white forest where pines stood like watchmen. The silence grew heavy but not cruel. After a while she asked, "Why help me?" Tayan didn't answer at first. His breath came in slow clouds. "A long time ago," he said finally, "a woman pulled me from the river when I was a boy. She was white. Her people called her a fool. But she said saving a life means your heart still lives." The words hung between them, fragile as ice crystals. Clara lowered her eyes. The ache in her chest shifted. No longer humiliation, but something quieter, something that frightened her more than loneliness. Trust. When they reached a rise overlooking the valley, he stopped. Far below, through the storm's pale veil, she could see a faint orange glow, a fire burning in a distant cabin. "That is home," he said. "If you want it." She looked down, then at him. His face was solemn, unreadable. The wind swirled between them, tugging at her hair, at his cloak. He turned toward her fully now, the snow glinting on his skin like shards of moonlight. His voice, deep and unwavering, carried through the storm. "I need a woman," he said quietly. "And you need a home." For a long moment, neither moved. Then the wind howled again, and the snow rose around them like smoke. She met his gaze, steady, ancient, unafraid, and for the first time since the train left, she didn't feel alone. The cloak slipped from her shoulders. He caught it before it hit the ground. The firelight in the distance flickered once, like a heartbeat waiting to be claimed. Snow followed them like a memory that refused to fade. The trail wound through pine and stone, the air thick with the clean scent of frost and resin. Clara walked behind Tayan Greyhawk, her steps sinking into the imprints of his boots. Each footprint was a promise of direction, each breath a cloud of effort. Her body ached, but she was no longer shivering. His fur cloak held the warmth of fire, the faint smell of smoke and pine needles curling around her like a whisper of belonging she dared not name. When they reached the ridge, the land opened. A valley of quiet grace, rimmed by trees that bent under the weight of snow. Below, the cabin sat like a secret half buried by winter. Smoke rose thin and gray from its chimney. The world there seemed smaller, slower, safe in a way that frightened her. Tayan looked back only once, his eyes searching hers. "You can rest soon," he said. Clara nodded, too breathless to speak. The walk had drained her, but more than that, it had stripped her of the pretense she carried. There was no room for pride in this wilderness. The cabin door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of pine wood, leather, and the faint sweetness of stored cornmeal. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting the room in warm orange light. The walls were lined with shelves, some filled with tools, others with empty jars. Against one corner stood a table built from rough boards, and on it, 2 pewter cups waited like patient companions. "Sit," Tayan said quietly. Clara obeyed. Her legs trembled as she lowered herself onto a bench. She watched him move through the space. How deliberate every gesture was. He hung his bow, brushed snow from his hair, and poured water into a kettle. His silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone who had learned that words often failed where care began. He brought her a bowl of beans, steaming and salted, with a slice of hard bread. She hesitated before eating, then, once she tasted it, could not stop. The food was coarse, simple, and somehow the most merciful thing she'd known in months. Taein watched from across the table. "How long since you ate?" "2 days," she murmured. He nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "Your hands," he said softly. Clara froze. "What about them?" "They are raw." He reached out, hesitated, then took her left hand gently. His fingers were calloused, but his touch careful, reverent. "You worked the land?" "My husband had a claim near Abilene," she said, voice quiet. "But the mine collapsed last spring. Took him with it." Taein's thumb brushed over a small scar near her wrist. "You stayed." "I had nowhere else to go." She drew her hand back slowly. "When I tried to remarry, the man changed his mind. Said I was cursed." The fire popped. A log fell inward, sending sparks up like startled birds. "You are not cursed," Taein said, his gaze steady. "The world is simply cruel to those who survive." The words stilled her. No preacher, no neighbor, no passing stranger had ever said it that way, like survival itself was something holy. She studied him in the firelight. His face was strong but quiet, shaped by wind and grief. A long scar curved from his temple to his jaw, faded but deep, as though it had once carried a story no one had the right to tell. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "For 3 winters. My people scattered after the raids. Some went north, some died. This place," he gestured around them. "It was to be a home for someone who never arrived." Clara's throat tightened. The air between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. Shared loss, perhaps, or recognition of a solitude too old to name. When she stood to wash the bowl, he stopped her with a glance. "You are my guest." "I need to do something," she said, her tone firmer than before. "If I sit still, I'll feel useless." He considered that, then gave a single nod. "Tomorrow. Not tonight." She didn't argue. Her body was heavier than her will. Later, she lay near the fire wrapped in a blanket he'd given her. The warmth seeped into her bones, and yet sleep came slowly. She could hear him outside, splitting wood beneath the eaves, the rhythmic sound of axe and echo a strange comfort. Every now and then, she caught the murmur of his voice, words not in English, low and rhythmic like prayer. She closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she wasn't waiting for someone to leave. In the gray light of morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Taein was already at the table, shirtless again, his breath visible in the cold air that drifted through the broken windowpane. "I'll fix that today," he said, nodding toward the gap. "I can sew the curtain," she offered, her voice still husky with sleep. He gave her a quiet look of approval, then passed her a tin cup. The coffee was bitter, strong enough to make her cough once before laughing softly. The sound startled her. She hadn't heard her own laughter in months. Taein's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "Better," he said. She watched him as he mended the shutter. Each motion was patient, measured. He wasn't a man rushing through chores. He was someone who treated even small acts like prayers. As she worked beside him, sweeping the floor, something inside her began to steady. The cabin was rough, but every corner carried the weight of intention. A life built by hand, one nail at a time. When her fingers brushed his arm while passing the kettle, she felt the warmth of his skin, the strength beneath it. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. The moment lingered, silent, almost sacred. In the afternoon, a storm rolled in, drumming against the roof. They sat near the hearth, listening to the wind gnawing at the walls. Clara stared into the flames, their shifting light reminding her of the world she'd lost, and the strange, fragile one forming here. "Taein," she said softly, "do you ever wish to leave this place?" He looked at her, eyes reflecting firelight. "No," he said. "It is the only place that does not lie." She thought about that long after he stood to add wood to the fire. Later, as night deepened, She burned her hand on the kettle's handle. She gasped, pulling back sharply. Before she could reach for water, Tayan was there, his hand closing gently around hers, guiding it beneath the cool stream from the bucket. His touch was steady, deliberate, a kind of tenderness that had no need of words. Their eyes met. He did not look away. "You care too much," she whispered, trembling. He shook his head once. "No," he said. "Not enough." Outside, snow fell in heavy silence. Inside, the firelight wrapped around them like a living thing. When she finally withdrew her hand, the air between them pulsed with unspoken meaning. He returned to the fire, his face half in shadow, half in light. Clara turned away, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She touched the fur cloak still draped over the chair, the same one he'd given her at the station. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden beneath it. The storm raged on outside, but the air inside the cabin had changed. Warmer, fragile, uncertain. She looked toward the door, where the snow began to pile high against the threshold. Somewhere beyond the pines, the world would whisper about them soon. But for now, in the hush of the storm, she knew she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Winter deepened, and the days in Tayan's cabin fell into a rhythm of quiet survival. Mornings began with firewood and coffee. Evenings ended with silence and the whisper of the wind through the pines. Clara had begun to hum when she worked, soft, trembling tunes from her girlhood. And sometimes Tayan would pause in his tasks to listen, though he pretended not to. The cabin no longer felt borrowed. It was becoming something fragile and unnamed, balanced between refuge and sin. When the snow eased at last, she walked with him to town. The sun, weak and white, burned through the clouds as if ashamed of its own warmth. The trail was lined with icicles that glittered like glass teeth. Tayan walked ahead, his long strides deliberate, his presence both shield and target. Clara followed close, every step weighed down by the thought of eyes waiting beyond the ridge. The town appeared gray and still, a cluster of wooden bones half buried in snowdrift. A dog barked once, then vanished behind a shutter. The general store's bell clanged when she entered, and the sound cut through the room like a shot. Every head turned. Mrs. Vance, wrapped in her fur shawl and perfume of superiority, froze mid-sentence behind the counter. Her mouth twisted into something that might have been pity if it weren't sharpened by cruelty. "Well," she said slowly, "look what the wind brought back." Clara kept her eyes low. "I came for flour and lamp oil." Mrs. Vance's gaze flicked toward the door, where Tayan stood waiting outside, his breath forming small clouds. "I imagine you'll be needing more than that, living up there with—" She paused, feigning thought. "With him." Clara's hands tightened around her coin purse. "Just the flour," she said. Behind her, whispers began, muffled, venomous. Words like shameful and ruined, carried in low tones. She tried to ignore them, tried to breathe. But the air was heavy with judgment. When she turned to leave, Mrs. Vance's voice followed her, honeyed and cruel. "A woman like you could have made a decent life, if you hadn't fallen so low." Clara's vision blurred. She stepped into the cold, heart hammering, and met Tayan's eyes. He said nothing, but his jaw had tightened. She could tell he'd heard. They walked home without speaking. The trail stretched long and cruel before them, the trees whispering secrets overhead. Once, halfway up the ridge, Clara stopped. "They'll never stop," she said. Tayan turned, snow dusting his shoulders like ash. "You care for their words?" "I care for how they make me feel," she whispered. "Like I'm something to hide." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then don't hide." The simplicity of it stung. She wanted to shout that it wasn't that easy, that the world could kill a woman's name faster than a bullet. But his eyes held such calm certainty that her anger faltered. Back at the cabin, she busied herself with chores. Her movements were sharp, almost frantic, the scraping of the broom, the clatter of pots. When she burned her hand on the stove again, she didn't flinch this time. Tayan watched her from the doorway. "You fight ghosts," he said quietly. She froze. "Maybe I do." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stepped outside into the freezing dark, the world lit only by a sliver of moon. The pines groaned under their heavy snow, and somewhere an owl cried. She looked toward the distant town lights and thought of her husband's grave, of the letters she'd written to no one, of the names people gave women who tried to start again. Behind her, the door opened. "You'll freeze," Tayan murmured. "I've been colder before." He stepped beside her. Their shoulders brushed, and the touch anchored her. For a long time, they stood in silence, two silhouettes carved against the snow. In the days that followed, she began to find small ways to reclaim herself. She washed the windows until light spilled more freely inside. She mended Tayan's torn shirt, though he seldom wore it. She carved her initials into the handle of the broom. Not a mark of ownership, but of existence. When she returned to town again, alone this time, her heart thudded with quiet defiance. She bought sugar and coffee, and met Mrs. Vance's gaze without flinching. The woman sniffed. "So you mean to stay with him?" "I mean to live," Clara said. Her voice didn't waver. By the time she left, the gossip followed her like a shadow, but it no longer hollowed her out. That evening, she found Tayan outside, repairing the fence. A small boy stood beside him, dark-haired, thin, no older than 10. The child held a broken snare, his expression shy. Tayan knelt, showing him how to twist the wire back into place. His voice, usually quiet, softened further as he guided the boy's small hands. Clara stood in the doorway, watching. Something inside her chest trembled. Not fear this time, but wonder. He wasn't what the town whispered. He was gentleness hidden inside strength, the kind of man who could rebuild what others destroyed. When the boy left, she walked over. "Who was he?" "Eli," Tayan said. "His mother died last spring. He comes for help with traps. I teach him." Clara smiled faintly. "You have a kind heart." He wiped his hands on the snow. "It is not kindness," he said. "It is memory. Once, someone taught me too." They shared dinner in silence. When the wind howled outside, she felt no fear, only the fragile comfort of belonging somewhere no one could see. Later, when she began to clear the dishes, Tayan stopped her. "You went to town," he said quietly. "I did." "They spoke cruelly?" "They tried." He nodded once. "And?" She met his gaze. "They failed." For the first time, a smile touched his lips fully. It changed his face, made him almost boyish. "Good," he said simply. The moment hung between them, warm and real. Then he stood, moved to the table, and placed a small wooden carving in front of her. It was rough, unfinished, but shaped clearly into the form of a bird. "It is for you," he said. "A wren. Small, but strong enough to survive winter." She traced the outline with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful." He shrugged. "It is only wood." "No," she whispered. "It's hope." The firelight flickered against their faces. The air thickened with all the words neither dared to say. When a knock came at the door, they both startled. Tayan's hand went to the knife on the table. Clara's breath caught. Outside, the wind carried a voice, male, cold, familiar. "Mrs. Hollis. I know you're in there." Her heart stopped. The voice belonged to a man she thought gone forever, the suitor from Kansas who had left her at the station. She stumbled backward, her face pale as snow. Tayan looked at her, his expression unreadable, his muscles tensing like coiled steel. The man outside pounded again. "You can't hide behind that savage forever." Clara's throat closed. The room pulsed with fear and firelight. Tayan stepped toward the door, slow and steady, every movement controlled. Outside, the storm began again, wind screaming through the pines as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. The pounding on the door came again, fists striking wood like a drum of anger and memory. Clara froze beside the hearth, the fire casting her shadow across the wall. Snow hissed against the windows, wind slipping through the cracks in the cabin, as though the storm itself listened. Tayan stood unmoving, every muscle drawn tight. Outside, the voice rose again, thick with drink and old ownership. "Clara, you owe me an explanation." The words struck her harder than the wind. Her stomach twisted, and shame, an old familiar ache, burned through her chest. She had thought this ghost buried beneath miles of snow and silence. But here he was, Clayton Reeves, the man who left her at the station, now shouting at her door as if the world still belonged to him. Tayan's eyes met hers, calm but dark with intent. "Stay by the fire," he said quietly. She shook her head, trembling. "He'll hurt you. He's drunk. He's mean." Tayan's expression did not change. "Let him try." Before she could stop him, he opened the door. Wind and snow burst inside, carrying the smell of whiskey and fury. Clayton staggered forward, his face red from cold, his eyes wild. "So it's true," he sneered, scanning the room until they found Clara. "Living with a savage now, are you? You whore yourself for warmth." Clara flinched as if struck. The words landed where bullets might have been kinder. Tayan's voice was low, steady, dangerous. "You leave." Clayton barked a laugh. "And let you keep what's mine?" He pointed at Clara, his glove torn, his hand shaking. "She's a white woman, not some." Tayan moved before the insult finished. He gripped Clayton by the collar, and hauled him out into the snow, like a man dragging garbage to the road. Clayton stumbled, snarling, trying to draw the pistol at his side, but Tayan caught his wrist and twisted until the weapon fell, vanishing into the drift. "Go home," Tayan said again, his voice barely above a whisper. Clayton spat blood. "You think she'll stay with you? You're filth. She'll come crawling back once she sees what you really are." Tayan's hand clenched once more, then released him. "Then let her choose," he said. "But you will not speak that way again." Clayton's face twisted, his pride a wound too deep to heal. "You'll regret this." He turned, staggering into the white darkness, his curses fading into the wind. Tayan closed the door and leaned against it, his breath steady but heavy. The fire snapped behind him. Clara stood there, her eyes wet, her face pale with something between terror and awe. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. He turned to her. "You wanted me to let him speak that way?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But you'll have the whole town against you now. They already hate you. This will make it worse." His jaw tightened, but his tone was even. "Then let them hate." Clara looked down at her hands, trembling. "I don't want you hurt because of me." "You are not a curse," he said. "You are the storm they fear." The words struck deep, too deep. She sat by the fire, silent for a long time. The wind outside thickened, snow whipping like ghosts through the cracks. Tayan added wood to the fire, then moved to repair the door latch Clayton had loosened. Neither spoke again until the cabin was sealed tight against the storm. By midnight, the blizzard swallowed the mountain whole. The roof groaned under its weight, and ice formed along the inside of the windows. Clara lay awake, listening to the howling, to the faint creak of the rafters, to the steady rhythm of Tayan's breathing as he sat near the fire, watchful, like a sentinel carved from stone. When the wind screamed louder, she rose, unable to rest. "It sounds angry," she murmured. Tayan glanced up. "It only sounds like what we hold inside." Clara moved closer to the fire. The warmth glowed against her skin, orange and gold. "And what do you hold inside?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Loss. Like snow that never melts." Her throat tightened. "And you think I'm the same?" "I think," he said, "you are the part that remembers the sun." For a moment, they just watched each other. The cabin crackled and sighed around them, the wind clawing at the roof as if jealous of the warmth within. Then the sound came, a thunderous crack. One of the pines outside gave way, crashing down onto the cabin's roof with a roar. The room shook. Sparks leapt from the fire. A beam splintered near the window, spilling snow through a jagged tear. Tayan grabbed his axe and pushed against the broken door. "Stay back," he ordered. But Clara followed anyway, pulling her coat tight. "You can't go out in this." He turned, eyes fierce. "If I don't, the roof will collapse." Snow blasted through the opening as he forced his way outside. The storm swallowed him instantly, just a shape in the white. Clara waited, pacing, the cold biting through her shoes. When she heard the groan of wood again, she rushed out after him, ignoring the pain that clawed at her lungs. "Tayan!" she shouted, her voice nearly torn away by the wind. He was at the fallen tree, swinging the axe with grim determination. Each strike was a dull, heavy thud swallowed by the storm. She stumbled to his side, grabbing a broken branch to help clear the snow. "I told you to stay," he shouted. "I won't let you die fixing your home alone," she cried back. He turned toward her, his eyes blazing, not with anger, but something deeper. In that moment, between snow and breath and exhaustion, something wordless passed between them. A vow not yet spoken. Together they worked until dawn began to break, a faint, pale light seeping through the clouds. The storm began to calm, its rage spent. They stood side by side, soaked, trembling, covered in frost and sawdust. Tayan's shoulder was bleeding, a deep gash from the splintered beam. Clara gasped, reaching for him. "You're hurt." He looked down at the blood and shrugged. "It is small." "It's not small," she said fiercely, guiding him back toward the cabin. Inside, she tore a strip from her dress and pressed it to the wound. Her fingers shook as she tied the bandage, the firelight catching the tears she didn't notice falling. Tayan watched her, silent, his breath uneven. When she finished, she tried to pull her hand away, but he caught it. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm despite everything. "You should go," he said softly. Her heart lurched. "What?" He looked at the door. "When the storm clears, go back to town. It will be easier for you." Her voice broke. "Easier to be alone again? To be shamed?" His grip loosened. "Better than to be hated for standing beside me." She rose abruptly, anger flooding through the cracks of her fear. "You think I care about what they say? You should." "No," she said, voice trembling. "I did once. And it killed everything good in me. But not this time." She knelt before him, eyes burning with quiet fire. "You gave me back the sound of my own heartbeat, Tayan Greyhawk. If that's sin, let them choke on it." For a long time, neither moved. The firelight flickered over their faces, painting them in gold and shadow. Then, slowly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You would choose this life?" he asked. "I already have." The words landed like a promise. The cabin seemed to breathe around them. The groan of wood, the whisper of wind easing outside, the faint trickle of melting snow from the roof. When dawn broke fully, the world outside glittered under a pale sun. Smoke rose from the chimney again, thin but steady. Tayan stepped out into the light, the cold biting at his bare skin, and looked toward the town below. Clara stood beside him, her coat drawn tight, her chin lifted. "They will come," he said. "Then let them see," she replied. By midday, word of Clayton's humiliation had spread. A small crowd gathered near the preacher's house. Men with rifles slung over their shoulders, faces hard with the kind of righteousness that grows from fear. Tayan saw them first from the ridge. Clara stood beside him, refusing to step back. When the men reached the cabin, Clayton was at their front, his lips swollen but his pride unbroken. "You think you can take what's ours and make a home out of sin?" He spat. "We won't stand for it." Tayan said nothing. The wind was still, the forest eerily quiet. Clara stepped forward. Her voice shook but carried. "This home isn't yours. It was built with hands that never took what wasn't given. You left me in the cold. He gave me warmth. You left me hungry. He gave me bread. You left me nothing but a name whispered in shame. He gave me a reason to speak it again." The men shifted uneasily. No one had expected her to speak. Clayton's face twisted. "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll—" "Enough." Tayan's voice cut through the air like steel. "There's no more to say." He stepped closer, towering over them, but not with rage, with something deeper, older, unbreakable. "You came to take her back. But she was never yours." Clayton hesitated, searching for courage among his men. None moved. The wind rose again, sweeping through the pines, carrying with it a sound almost like the sigh of the earth. The moment stretched until, one by one, the men turned away, muttering. Only Clayton remained for a moment longer, hatred quivering in his throat, before he too turned and disappeared down the trail. When silence returned, Clara released the breath she'd been holding. Tayan looked at her. "Now they'll talk more than ever," he said. "Then let them," she whispered. He stepped closer, his hand lifting to touch her face. For the first time, she didn't flinch. "This land bears witness," he said softly. "To storms. To fire. To vows." She smiled faintly, her eyes bright in the morning light. "Then let it remember ours." He bent his forehead to hers, a gesture more sacred than any preacher's blessing. Around them, the wind quieted, the snow glittering like a crown upon the mountain. By evening, the cabin glowed with new fire, smoke curling into a calm sky. They sat side by side before the hearth, hands entwined, the world outside finally at rest. And though neither spoke of marriage aloud, the silence between them held the truth of it. An unbroken promise forged in snow, sealed in warmth, and carried on the breath of the mountain. Long after, when the town's whispers faded and spring came to the valley, those who passed the ridge swore they saw smoke rising still, a sign, they said, of two souls who refused to be undone by winter. And if you ever find yourself cold and wandering, remember this: the heart that endures the storm will always find its fire, and sometimes, if you're brave enough to stay, it becomes home.